All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started as people are still rolling in, but that's okay. First, a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available next week on our YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe and also follow us on our social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. The presentation will be available for download at the end of the webinar, as well as another takeaway that we have added in as well to assist with behavioral interview questions. Our 2017 Lunch and Learn webinar series are HRCI accredited, and each webinar is 1 hour of continuous education credits. With that being said, I'll go ahead and jump right into it. This is going to be on behavioral job interviewing and how to select the ideal candidate to meet the roles of the position that you're interviewing for. And in that context, words are powerful, and the way we express ourselves can go a long way in formulating the perception that people have of us. So, for example, if I were to say the sky is blue, most people would say, "Thanks, Captain Obvious," and go on about their day. But if I were to say the sky has a beautiful azure hue to it, most people would probably look up. It's the attention grabber that creates the interest. And the same applies for interviewing. As the interviewer, how do we know that someone's aptitude for eloquence is actually going to be an indicator of future performance? The answer is that we don't know that. And that's why we need to dig a little bit deeper and we need to be more specific. And that's where behavioral interviewing comes into play. Behavioral interviewing has actually been in use since back in the 1970s. Companies like AT&T and Accenture have been using behavioral job interviewing for years, for decades. The premise behind behavioral interviewing is that the most accurate predictor of future performance is past performance in similar situations. So behavioral interviewing, in fact, is said to be 55% predictive of future on-the-job behavior, while traditional interviewing is only 10% predictive. Traditional interview questions ask you generalities such as, "Tell me about yourself." The process of behavioral interviewing is much more probing and works very differently. And it starts with a strategy. In a traditional job interview, you can usually get away with asking a generalized question and getting a generalized answer. And what you're going to end up with is a non-predictor. You're not going to be able to evaluate anything other than what that person wants you to be able to hear. So if that person is very adept at being able to eloquently establish who they want you to think they are, then a traditional interview is going to allow them the flexibility to be able to do that. Behavioral interviewing is going to dig deeper. It's going to ask for specific scenarios, and it's going to ask specific questions, and it's going to use probing and follow-up questions in order to continue the process to dig deeper. On this slide here, take a look at these three candidates, A, B, and C. What I would like for you to do is answer a quick poll question for me. Which one would you hire? Simple enough, A, B, or C? So it looks like we're getting some B's and C's. We've got an A. So mostly it looks like it's coming down to B and C. And C wins it with 54.5%. So the reason I asked that question is that sometimes when we are interviewing and we don't come up with a strategy or a plan, perception is reality. And the reality is that interviewees, candidates, will know the basics of certain aspects of the interview process that they can utilize to create that perception, such as wear a nice suit, be clean shaven, shake hands, make eye contact, present yourself in a way that you want to be portrayed. But how do you know that when you're hiring C, based on that perception, that the reality isn't going to be that A shows up at the office on Monday? The best way to go about doing that is through the actual interview questions that you're working for. And in that regard, these are some of the advantages, the secret weapons, the things that that are out there and available to you. So if you were to Google how to interview, in 41 seconds, you get almost 1 billion hits. And that's great news for the candidates, because I've Googled it, and the majority of the information that comes up on Google is all geared towards the candidate, and it's all instruction on how to answer behavioral interview questions. But it doesn't give a whole lot of insight into actually how to conduct a behavioral interview. So you really have to dig to be able to find those types of things. So certain aspects like how to shake hands, what to wear, common questions, strengths, challenges, when to arrive, those are all available to the candidate. But are they pertinent to the actual information that's relevant to the role that you are trying to fill? And the answer is partially, but it's not going to make the decision for you. Obviously, if candidate A from the previous poll question shows up, then you may have an idea of what to expect. If candidate C does, you may also think that you have that concept of what to think, but the reality is that without digging a little bit deeper, you don't. So, a secret weapon. Our Omnia profile is a behavioral assessment targeting specific natural behavioral characteristics that is designed to be used as a foundation for you to establish the criteria in order to fill the role. So once you've established what you're looking for with regards to the role, then you're able to utilize distinct behavioral characteristics that line up with that role to develop the foundation to walk into the interview prepared. So now you have the ability to say, okay, that candidate C, the sharp-looking man, wouldn't mind having him in my office. You definitely represent the company well from that perspective. But then you get his behavioral characteristics and they don't line up. So what do you do from there? Well, that's where the interview comes in. And so you have built the foundation, established the foundation, and you're working towards the impression from the interview. Now, obviously, you utilize a lot of resources when you're doing your research on candidates, things like their references and background checks and social media, education, all of those tangible criteria that you're looking for in order to qualify that candidate. But the interview is going to make up the bulk of what you're going to gain the most information from. And the way to go about doing that is by establishing that strategy ahead of time in order to have the preparation in place to know what questions you want to ask. What's the difference between traditional interviewing and behavioral interviewing? Traditional interviewing is hypothetical situations. It tends to be closed-ended. It can be answered in generalities, and it's actually best suited for phone screenings where you're just trying to get some initial information because they can speak more to generalities so that you can pre-qualify them. But actually qualifying them is going to take a little bit more, and that's where behavioral interviewing comes in. It is experience-based. It is specific behaviors that are included. And it offers insight into the candidate's thought process with regards to how they approach certain scenarios and situations and how they're able to accomplish the tasks that are given to them and how they are able to demonstrate those successes. What we focus on, and I'm sure that everybody has heard of STAR, situation, task, action, result. Lately, the trend has been to take the T out and just make it a situation, action, result. What we're looking for when you're actually doing the interviewing is we're looking for you to utilize bona fide objective questions. Okay, they're going to be questions that are bona fide occupational questions. So it's questions that are specific to the role and how the candidate is going to approach the situations that are directly related to the role in order to be able to demonstrate that when they are in the position, they're going to be able to accomplish what's asked of them. So how do we go about doing that? We concentrate on the behaviors that are needed to be successful in the role. So behaviors for a sales representative, for example, you want to be talking about somebody that is competitive, is proactive, assertive, comfortable asking for business. They have a qualified communication style that builds rapport and develops relationships, and They are fast-paced, multitasking, and can work autonomously and independently. In that scenario, if you already understand that those are the behavioral traits that you're looking for, how do you go about finding out whether or not that person possesses those actual characteristics? It also includes what behaviors should be avoided. So if you're asking the bona fide occupational questions, then you also have a certain specific target behaviors that are not going to be suitable for the role. In that case, for example, of a sales representative, somebody that is cautious, somebody that is risk averse, somebody that is more analytical in their communication style, somebody that prefers a more patient, methodical approach to task orientation and completion, and somebody that needs structure and guidance. All of those are behaviors that are not going to generally sit well with your traditional producer-oriented role. So you can identify between the behaviors that you need and the behaviors that you want to avoid, and you can move forward with that general consensus in mind, that you're identifying what it is that makes the difference to the success of the role and the person that is chosen to occupy that position. And it can also help identify what the company culture is going to require. So when you're actually working with a candidate and going through the selection process and you're talking to them, you can get some indications based on their behaviors of how the company culture is going to be either well suited or not suited for them. All of these play into the role of behavioral interviewing and the way that you approach digging as deep as possible to find out the behaviors that you're looking for that have been targeted by the role. Questions like, tell me when, describe what you did, have you ever, give me an example, walk me through. Those are all specific, and they're all going to be asking the candidate for a certain scenario. So, for example, tell me a time when you were up against long odds and you overcame the situation. Now, the candidate, if they're prepared, will know that this is a situational question that they need to be able to answer in multiple parts, multiple stages. Situation, action, result. So in that scenario, if they start to give you generalities, that would be your opportunity to probe a little bit deeper. And so when probing a little bit deeper, it's asking follow-up questions. Real quick, let me jump back. Keep questions clear and concise. These are important aspects of behavioral interviewing to keep in mind. Keep questions clear and concise. The 80-20 rule. In an ideal interview scenario, you're already prepared enough that you've asked a targeted question that you could spend 80% of the time listening. 80% of the time listening and 20% of the time talking. And that's the ideal scenario in order to have the candidate be as thorough and specific and detail-oriented as possible about the situations that you're asking for them to describe. Give the candidate time to think. All right, this isn't an interrogation, it is an exploration. And so in that regard, different people process in different ways. So expecting somebody to automatically just jump right in and have a prepared answer is not necessarily going to produce the best results. You might want to give them a little bit of time to process the question, develop the answer, think of the scenario from their memory. One thing to keep in mind with regards to giving candidates time to think is that you want to avoid long, exaggerated pauses. So it is good to give the candidate time to think, but if it is a long, exaggerated pause, then you might be creating a situation, or they might be creating a situation where they're just on the spot, stumped, uncomfortable, whatever the case may be. And so having follow-up questions developed specifically for each one of the scenarios that you're going to be asking about can help prod them along and move them a little bit quicker and maybe get them a little bit more comfortable in the scenario so that they can talk a little bit more freely. And start easy. You don't want to build up. You don't want to start off with tell me about a time when you achieved 120% quota and earned President's Club. You want to start off a little bit slower because you actually want to ramp up to the point where you're getting to their ultimate successes and finding out the processes that they go about to address not only the day-to-day tasks that they're responsible for, but also the successes in the long run that they've been able to accomplish throughout their career. So during the interview, you want to focus, or you want the candidates to focus on I, not we. If the candidate starts the answer by saying something along the lines of, well, I went to the team and we decided that steer them in a different direction. We want to steer them more towards what they did specifically. So it's okay for them to start it off that way, but don't let them go too far into what the team actually did. At some point in there, okay, that sounds great and it's a good approach to incorporate the team, but what part of the team responsibilities were you directly responsible for, and what did you do to accomplish the tasks that you had? And when you present them with that you-oriented question, it'll provide more specificity for them to be able to focus directly on what their accomplishment was. Concentrate on time frames. We want to know how long it took them to move from step A to step B to step C. So we want to know the situation, the action, the result, and how long it took them to actually accomplish. And then we're focusing on the who. This is our SAR. This is our situation, action, result. What did they do? How did they do it? And what was the outcome? It's as simple as that. And the answers should be as simple as that. So if you are digging into that and you are going to the point where you are identifying what the situation was, how they went about accomplishing it, and what the outcome was, then you're putting them in a position where it is specific, guided, simplified, and should be concise. So with that in mind, I want to ask another quick poll question of you and give you a little bit of time. But what I'm going to ask is, give me some behaviors that successful salespeople display. And then give me some behaviors that successful service people display. So maybe if you guys are in more of a service-oriented role and you have more familiarity with that, then focus on the service side of it. If it's more sales, then focus on the sales side of it. Assertiveness, absolutely. Energy, confidence. I'm seeing a lot of sales. Oh, here comes some service. Motivated by targets and goals, absolutely. Go-getters, no fear of rejection. Persistence, absolutely. How about incentivized by money? I think one of the biggest differences between sales and service is that salespeople tend to be incentivized by commission structures and bonuses and quotas because of that competitive attitude and that fiery, proactive, go-get-em type of an approach. Whereas service are team-centric. They want to be part of the team. They want to provide great support. They want to feel included, and they want to be experts at their jobs. And they focus a lot on attention to detail in order to make that happen. Mission-driven, empathy, helpful, careful. Motivated by money, I think, would fall under the sales category. Cautious is absolutely right. All right, problem solver. Thank you so much. That was awesome participation. My screen is just filled. Consultative, risk avoidant, fantastic. Problem solver, that's interesting. Problem solver came up on both, and that is a very good point because they are both required to have that aspect, and they are both going to always be put in positions where problem solving is something that is universal to both. So that's a good point. All right, going back. So we talked a little bit about some of the characteristics that you would be looking for from those certain types of people. So as you are associating those characteristics and those behavioral traits, put it in the context of identifying those behavioral traits through the course of asking these scenario-based questions. That's the essence of behavioral interviewing. You have the characteristics identified, and you can transition it to the question so that you know what you're looking for. That's a game plan. That's your strategy, and that's how you can be the most effective at behavioral interviewing. You have to be able to have a plan of action and you put it into play. And all of that is involved with the preparation that you put into identifying those characteristics and then identifying in their answers whether or not they possess them. So some examples here that you'll be able to see. These are some behavioral questions that can be used in interviews that would ask for the specifics of the what, how, and the outcome. Now, I've listed 5 of them here, for example. 1, can you describe a time when you encountered obstacles in your last job while in pursuit of a goal? 2, tell me about a time when you faced competing deadlines. How did you handle it? 3, give me an example of a time when you had to step in for someone else. 4, tell me about a time when you had to make a quick decision. What happened? 5, tell me about a time when your work performance was affected by something outside of your control. So if you notice the common trend in here, they are all of the first few words in each one of the questions is asking for something specific. Can you describe a time? Tell me about a time. Give me an example. Tell me about a time. Tell me about a time. So it's asking for the specifics, and that's the most important aspect. Now, based on based on those questions, one more quick poll question. Which of these will need more information? All right, I'll give you a hint. And I don't see the chat box, so you're probably chatting in there, but it's a trick question. They all require more information. And the reason being is that when you actually get into the question and answer portion of this and you're asking these specific behavioral questions, you're going to need to be prepared with follow-up questions. And the follow-up questions are going to work in conjunction with the question and answer format here. So it creates more of a conversational aspect and gives you the ability to kind of steer them in the right direction so that they're giving you the answer that you're looking for, not necessarily portraying themselves as something that they're not, but at least sticking to the pattern of what, how, and what was the outcome. So with that being said, follow-up is essential. Listen. One of the things that a lot of us can struggle with at times for different reasons is active listening. And active listening requires us to actually be able to interpret the answers that are coming out through listening for the cues that you're trying to target. So if you're listening for those specific behavioral characteristics and how they line up with the role, you've already identified what those characteristics are. You're putting them into action through the behavioral interview questions, and you're guiding them through the follow-up questions that derive more specifics from the answers that they're giving. This goes back to that 80-20 rule. That 20% can be used as that sort of oversight to ensure that this is going in the direction that you want it to be going in and that they're not kind of going off the rails. But it's also your opportunity to really divest yourself in what the answers are so that you can identify those characteristics. For example, if you're interviewing for a sales position and you're looking for an assertive individual, and you ask a behavioral interview question along the lines of, tell me about a time when you had your greatest sales success. The question, obviously, the answer we're looking for, obviously, is going to be the WHO, the what, how, and the outcome. But throughout the course of the question, you might get more of a story. And it could be something along the lines of what I spoke about a minute ago, where it starts off with, well, The team was presented with this great opportunity, so we got together and we discussed what our approach was going to be with regards to how we were going to source this product, how we were going to create the need, and how we were going to develop the right questions to identify who the candidates are. At that point, you've heard, but follow up with, that's fantastic. We're all about team orientation and we work great as a team, but what did you do? What did you specifically do in order to accomplish the goal of achieving the outcome that you're telling me that you achieved? So steer them back towards themselves, focus on those I answers, and allow them the opportunity to brag on themselves a little bit. Take notes if needed, because a lot of times you'll be able to create correlations between the answers that are coming out and the characteristics, the behaviors that you're looking for, by actually taking notes on some of the key points that they were talking about throughout the course of their answer. Ask for follow-up examples. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the greatest success story where they brought in the most dollars or they sold the most product. It could just be something that was as simple as a customer that you talked to 6 months ago and you persistently stayed on them until you got to the point where they made a purchase, no matter what size the purchase is. But that persistence, that assertiveness, that follow-up, those are the characteristics that you're looking for. And they may not have directly used those words, but that you'll be able to ascertain from their answer what the specific characteristics are that you're looking for based on how they approached that type of a situation. And in doing so, the ultimate outcome being that they made the sale. It shouldn't matter whether it was $1 million sale or $1,000 sale. The fact of the matter is that what you were looking for was the substance of what they were doing in order to accomplish the success that they had. And I can tell you from personal experience, there is as much success from accomplishing that 6-month sale for that smaller package as there is for that $1 million sale for that multi-conglomerate. You can have that feeling of accomplishment from both. And so a lot of times you'll get a variance of answers. Concentrate on the substance of what you're looking for to determine the behaviors. If they're having difficulties, rephrase the question. If you get that long exaggerated pause, work back through it with them so that they understand exactly what it is that you're looking for, and they can give you the description of how those things took place and what their approach was in order to accomplish the outcome. And know when to stop. A lot of times we can take it a little bit too far because we either don't feel like we've gotten the answer that we're looking for, or we don't feel as confident in making a decision on this candidate. And in those cases, we can take things too far, and it can actually create more negative results because we have an overload of information now, and we might have multiple behaviors that presented themselves in different situations. So that goes to the specifics of the preparation that you put in and the questions that you're going to ask. Stick to that plan and move forward with it. And remember, it's not an interrogation. It's very important to understand that you're trying to create dialogue with them. Yes, you have specific questions that you want answered, and you have a specific way that you want them answered. But take it back to that 80-20 rule. You're not interrogating them. You want them to do most of the talking, and you want to do the analyzing through listening. And in that scenario, you'll be able to identify what it is or what it isn't that they possess behaviorally to be able to fit that role. It goes to very pointed questions to elicit detailed responses, and they're all aimed at determining if the candidate possesses the desired characteristics. So basically, the gist of the interrogation aspect is that we want to put the candidates at ease so that they have the comfort level to be able to discuss and that will give you the past behaviors that are going to be most indicative of the future predictors of behavior and how they would handle certain situations. So, good. Questions? Actually, we'll go ahead and go to this. All right, so should you ask the same question to all candidates no matter the position? No. Every interview is going to be different depending on the role. Now, if you're talking role specific, now it says no matter the position, so in that regard, the answer would be no, because every position is going to be different and every position is going to require different behavioral characteristics. And so if that's the case, then identifying the behavioral characteristics is going to help you structure the questions that you're going to ask in order to find the answers that you're looking for. For example, you're not necessarily going to ask a salesperson how they approach what was your biggest success in making an upset client happy? That's not necessarily going to be probing for behavioral characteristics that you're looking for in a sales representative. As a sales representative, you want to be looking for questions that target more specifically what they are able to accomplish through their production and the approach that they take in order to get there. Let me scroll back up and see. Okay. Yes. So I understand the questions need to be phrased according to the skills that you need. That's correct. Again, it goes back to identifying the behavioral characteristics of the role that you're looking to fill, and then being able to tailor the questions to specifically address the needs of the role and to ascertain whether or not the behavioral characteristics are possessed by the candidate that you are interviewing at the time. Role playing can be hit or miss. It depends because it gives them the opportunity to use hypotheticals. And if you're role playing with somebody, then they might be very good at understanding what it is that you're looking for. And by creating that role play, you're giving them the opportunity to present themselves in the way that they think that you want them to be presented, not necessarily focusing on past behaviors. And past behaviors, as I mentioned, are going to be the primary indicators of future performance. But that's not to say that role playing is a horrible thing. It's just that if you are going to utilize it, then you're going to need to utilize it with as many specifics as possible. Are behavioral assessments useful or meaningful? Yes. And the reason why is because they are successful indicators of natural behaviors. So when you're working with an assessment, again, if you remember that pie chart, the assessment formulates about 25% of what your selection process would be, and it really should be the first thing that you do, because you have then identified their natural behaviors. Now you want to find out if they're utilizing those natural behaviors in the workplace. And so if they are, that's how you're going to be able to find out, is by asking the behavioral questions and looking for the sources of the who's and the how and the outcome, or the what, the how, and the outcome. Sure. The 80-20, okay, the question is, would you go over the 80-20 rule again? The 80-20 rule is that during the course of the interview, you want to be so well prepared that you're not going to necessarily need to be stumbling over anything, searching for questions, asking generalities, speaking in hypotheticals. You have targeted questions, which provides you the opportunity to lay the question out there and then spend 80% of the time listening and 20% of the time talking. So if your preparation is in place and you go in with a game plan, then you should be able to target questions, produce some follow-up questions to probe a little bit deeper, but still allow them the opportunity to spend the majority of the time talking. And what you want to be doing is actively listening, taking notes, and deriving which behavioral characteristics you can identify from that candidate that would most directly apply to the role that you are trying to fill. How many interviews should you conduct for each candidate? I don't believe that there's a specific answer to that because it's going to depend on the amount of information that you get. I have seen plenty of situations where somebody was able to ascertain through a phone screen, a behavioral assessment, and one interview that this person possesses the behavioral characteristics on paper through the assessment and also through the answers to the questions that I had presented all the behavioral characteristics that I was looking for. Now, there are other times where there are uncertainties, and that's probably going to be the more common. Those uncertainties are going to require more information. Stick with the same game plan, and depending on how much of a sense of urgency there is to fill that role, don't make a decision unless you feel 100% confident. That would be the best advice that I could give, because taking a chance on somebody because they present well, they look good, their questions were kind of on the line, but you didn't really know for certain, but you think you want to give them a chance. It costs essentially a year's salary on a bad hire. So if you're going to put somebody with a questionable background, questionable history, presents well, answers the questions somewhat well, but you're going to go ahead and hire them on your gut, then you're putting yourself and the company in a position where you might be sacrificing a lot of money because 3 months down the road that person might not make it, and then you are back to square one. That's why behavioral interviewing is so important as opposed to traditional interviewing, because it really gives you that opportunity to get that sense of 100% satisfaction with the candidate that you're putting in place. And by being able to evaluate multiple candidates, you'll also be able to evaluate different approaches to the answers and use that comparison to be able to help you make an educated decision and not something that's just based on your gut or your instinct. Generally speaking, with regards to that question, most companies have at least 3 interviews: the phone, the first, and the second. So that's the general rule of thumb to it. But like I said, it depends on how quickly you're able to identify those behavioral characteristics and know for sure that you're not making a gut decision. You're making one that's based on facts and evidence. So if you're going into the second interview, how do you interview differently? Is it still behavioral based? Yes, it is behavioral based, but take any training program, for example. When a new employee enters a company and they go through training, do they just get all of the information thrown on their desk at one time, say, I'll be back in a week, you'll take the test. If you pass, then you're in. If you fail, then you're out. It's generally not the way things go. The learning curve requires that there be a little bit more time to concentrate on different aspects. So while you want to, part of the active listening is after the interview is over, part of what the active listening will produce is potentially more questions. And if you do come up with more questions, then you want to take those questions and create a behaviorally based interview so that you can dig a little bit deeper, find out more specifics. So yes, it would still be behavioral based. It would not be the same questions, but it would be a continuation of the first interview. Does anybody have any more questions? All right. That concludes our presentation on behavioral interviewing. Next week we have on March 23rd, The Art of Subtle Selling and Customer Service. It is a paid webinar with a 30-seat limit, and it's going to cover customized coaching and our customer service report. Now, these reports are designed specific to the customer service arena, and they are generated to produce a matching target candidate for you for the role that you've established. So if you take those behavioral characteristics that we spoke about, the customer service report, our client advisor team will work with you to develop what is going to be the best representation of the role behaviorally and give you the ranges that you would want to see those behaviors fall into when the candidates complete the assessment. So if that is something that you're interested in, and I encourage you to register for that. So that brings us to our conclusion. Again, next week, the art of subtle selling and customer service. Be sure to check us out on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Follow us. If you want more information on behavioral assessments, if you want any more information on behavioral interviewing, my contact information will be up in a second. Actually, I can. All right, so my contact information is available right there. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you will see the takeaways. One is a PDF of the presentation that was given today, and the other is a list of behavioral interview questions that might be useful to you with helping formulate what your questions are going to be with regards to the roles that you're looking to fill. So if there are no more questions and everything is done, I appreciate your time and I look forward to the next time. Everyone have a wonderful day and thank you so much again.